Welcome to episode 177 of the Necronomicon.com.
You know that feeling when you're searching for a new horror book, but you're just being stared down by a wall of Stephen King? We're trying to change that. We're Butcher Cabin Books, a new horror-focused bookstore giving shelf space to indie horror writers. Don't worry, we still carry King, but he's quarantined to his own section. Learn more at horrorbookstore.com, where you can buy books online along with merch and mystery boxes. Or you can visit us in person in Louisville, Kentucky, where we're open year-round.
If you're looking to start your own podcast, you should check out Libsyn.com and get up to 2 months of free podcasting service when you use our code NECRO, all caps, NECRO. Libsyn provides you with great customer service and support. They have real-time podcast analytics, free podcast guides and tutorials, and everything else you'll need to get started podcasting today. Go to libsyn.com and enter the promo code NECRO today. And check out the Necronomicon.com wherever you listen to podcasts. I am James Sabata, horror author, screenwriter, co-host of the podcast you're listening to right now, and I'm doing this whole podcast in English instead of Comanche.
And I am Don Guillory, author, historian, educator, co-host of the podcast, and I have two major things to say. I'm smarter than a beaver, and then two, fuck John Wayne.
I can see where this episode's going.
Oh, it's going.
So, joining us once again against his better judgment, MichaelBrent Collings is back. Dude, we love having you on the show. Thank you.
And I'll be doing mine in American Sign Language just to represent. Yes. So this is the last you'll hear of me.
I always joke that we're going to bring Michael Myers on as a guest. And then, there just won't be anything. Yeah.
Well, I mean, he's going to need the PR, and he's going to need the work soon since, Halloween ends.
Oh my God. Have you seen it?
I did see it. I like the other two more. I mean, this was, I don't know. I felt like it was bittersweet. The fans have been very polarized on the film. And I'll never say a movie was bad or was good. I will just say, there's some things I liked, some things I didn't like. Overall, I liked it. I would watch it again, but I feel that I would watch the other two more than I would watch the third one.
Yeah. I feel like there was definitely the first one, the script was pretty zeroed in and pretty coherent. And then the second one, I was like, and then they all took stupid pills because everybody just acts like a moron. And then the third one, they're like, remember all the stupid stuff that happened? Let's just forget about that. And we're going to turn this into some, I felt like this one was like, look, we can be serious and kind of deep and a little mystical. And it just was, it was a little bit, the continued slide into incoherence kind of troubled me a little bit. And it was like, halfway through, I was going like, what movie am I watching right now? Because it just was so not at all where the first two had led me to believe we were going to end up.
Right.
I just kept seeing tweet after tweet that was like, did I start the right movie? And I was like, right. I do not think that's the press that you want right there. It's
totally.
I'm not even saying anything for or against the film. I'm just saying that is not the reaction that you want from people, no matter what you made.
Yeah, confusion about whether you walked into the right theater, especially given that they're watching it at home.
Yeah, exactly. Is this my house? What's going on here? Somebody's been hiding in my basement for 4 years. That's weird.
Yeah. I was like, it was like the Halloween done by the CW for about 20 minutes. It was like, we're all groovy, cool kids, and we've got problems. And I'm over here I have big plans, and I was going to do a startup and tweet for my dad as a living, but then I got railroaded into jail, and now I'm kind of, I don't know, I'm sensitive and nice, but also I could just murder everybody. And I was like, what is going on now?
Look, we were all 22, 23 years old, thinking the same things, or in his case, 17, thinking the same thing. This one babysitting gig that could just go sideways, off the rails.
No spoilers.
I kept joking, and again, this is not a spoiler, but I kept joking that they should just redo 3, like do something like 3, and just do something that had nothing to do with anything. And then I feel really bad. So I'm sorry, everybody. But so with that said, MichaelBrent, do you want to tell our listeners a bit about yourself, man?
Sure. Oh yeah, I forgot I didn't do that. MichaelBrent Collings. I'm an international bestseller, and I've written like something close to 50 books, and I'm best known for horror, so I like talking about this stuff, but I write pretty much everything there is. It's like the only thing I think I haven't done, literally, I haven't done erotica, but other than that, if there's a major genre, I've got a book out in it, probably.
Do you have one that you go to that's like your second favorite, or one that you really, really like that isn't horror?
Well, not really. I mean, like I'll do like a scary book, and then I'll do something different, and I'll do a scary book, and I'll do something different. So like I like telling stories, and sometimes the story is a scary story, and those are the ones that the fans most expect. Like there's an ongoing series I'm writing called the I Am Legion series, and the next one of those comes out in November, because like the fans want that, and so I do that because it's a business and you want to make them happy, and I enjoy it. But in between, like last year I wrote a young adult science fiction, really light sci-fi humor novel, about these 4 kids that get kidnapped. So it was kind of a 80s throwback, like Explorers or Flight of the Navigator or something about that. And then I might just write a straight mystery, or I might, I've written like literally Western romance, and I just kind of go wherever. Oh, this is a fun story, and this is a saleable story. It's something my readers will enjoy, and if it fits those 2 criteria, then I'm off and running.
I love that. No, I always find it weird when people are like, "Oh, I can't write that. This is what I write," and I'm like, I get that if you're locked in a contract with the Big Four or something like that, or even an agent. An agent expects certain things, but when we're doing what we're doing, you can write whatever you feel like writing. It's okay. You don't have to use pen names on everything. You totally can too. But I feel like, at least from my point of view, doing cons all the time, I feel like fans don't care. They're not like I'm going to use Victoria Schwab, for instance. Like, I love her work, but she has Victoria's stuff and she has V.E. Schwab stuff, and maybe she has some other pseudonyms I don't even know about out there. But she does it more so like, younger ones know to go to this one, or these people know to go to this. That's cool. But for me personally, even though I lean into horror mostly, like my stuff gets weird too. Like, I don't even know what my new book, Caduceus, I don't even know what the hell it is. I'm like, it's kind of horror. It's kind of this. I don't know. It's weird, whatever. So I think it's kind of sad when people get stuck. Like, I have to write this. And so I love hearing that you just go write what you want to write today.
Yeah. And I get it, because, and especially now everybody's so concerned in the indie space. It's like, you want to please Amazon, and you want to make your stuff search engine friendly for Amazon, and not mess up the algorithm. But I don't know. I didn't like write Western romance, and then the next month all my books disappeared, and nobody knew how to find them. And I do have a lot of sympathy for, like, if you write something really light and for kids, and then you write something really dark, that's one where I'm like, you maybe want to have a pen name there, just because you don't want your 5-year-old audience being like, well, I'm going to read Strangers next. Why is this guy's face getting pulled off? So
this kid's totally like, this guy's my favorite author.
I know, right? Well, I have a story, man. I got flown out to this school that they were all this huge fan of this series I wrote called The Colony Saga, and it's a pretty hardcore zombie series. And so I get called by the school, and they're like, we'll pay you to come out and talk to us, and we'll put you up at a hotel. And it was great, So I wrote this talk for these high schoolers, and I got off the plane, and all of the students, not all of them, but a bunch of students were waiting like on the tarmac. And that's when I go, oh my gosh, they're 11. So it was like not what I was expecting at all. They got a pretty lenient English teacher, I guess. But so right? I get not wanting to confuse people that way. But even then, I'm like, okay, it's got like a bright, colorful blue dragon on the front. That's probably safe. It's got a guy like leaning in the shadows, holding a knife. Like, maybe don't let the 5-year-old read that one, I guess. But so I definitely have
also
sympathy
be
for
impressed
people.
with his reading skills. So
Totally, right? Like that dude's headed for jail or the presidency. Not that there's much difference these days, but
I expect that from the hosts on this show. No.
We would never say anything controversial.
No. Look, and I'm equal opportunity. I tell my kids are like, they're getting old enough. They're asking about voting questions and stuff. And I have one who registered to vote for the first time. And, they're like, what party are you? And I go, all I can say is if they could figure out how to spell the word, ugh, I would write it out. And that would be my party. Like, I just want to be the founding member of the party. Like,
I tell
what's
mine
your platform? Everybody sucks.
Right. Three of my sons, one's 17, but they're all really close to voting age. The other two can vote. And I'm just like, dude, my party is like basically the Hippocratic Oath. Like, whatever doesn't harm people,
Right.
That's where I'm at. Like, if your policy is gonna harm someone, I probably hate it. That's it.
Yeah, it's rough. So politics aside, it's just, I get why people want to be known for this and they're worried. It is scary. Like, I do remember my first book, I'm trying to remember if my first book was I think it was a fantasy, because, at a certain point, they're not my babies. They really aren't. And I can't tell them apart at a certain point. So I think my first book was like a light fantasy. And then the next one was this sci-fi thriller horror thing or vice versa. And I do remember the second one going like, well, I hope this doesn't make people upset. But, like, I don't know, if they're reading a 500-page novel, they're probably smart enough to figure out like, well, this is science fiction and I don't like science fiction. So pass.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I mean, I always like tell people with this conversation, like, do you think that Stephen King just writes horror? Because I would really argue that he sometimes doesn't even do that.
He rarely writes horror anymore. It seems like
that's where I was really going. But yeah.
Yeah, no, he writes literary thrillers anymore. I mean, anything where you can spend 6 to 8 pages just, setting up a ray of sunshine coming through the window, which is kind of where he's at now. I think we're definitely not in mainstream horror anymore, and that's fine, but yeah, I think people have confused branding, which is important, and message continuity, which is important, with an inability to do anything different ever, which is not, it hasn't been my experience,
Mm-hmm.
Don, is your stuff, I mean, I know the answer. I'm just letting you explain your own books, but is your stuff more one genre? Are you going more places, like with whatever you're writing now? Or
well, considering that I'm writing horror erotica now. No, I'm just kidding.
There's a big push from one of our fans that he writes a Universal Monsters erotica book called The Monster Smash.
Oh my God.
I can't believe that tweet. Or at least that those comments started all going downhill over a joke, and I was like, I screwed myself. No pun intended.
I'm with you. I want the book.
No pun intended. Hey, Frankenstein's monster. Frankenstein's monster. He actually doesn't have bolts on the side of his head. It's something else. But anyway.
Oh my gosh.
This sounds like a bunch of panels I did in Salt Lake.
Oh my goodness. You're gonna be you're gonna be the Chuck Tingle of horror.
Sweet.
I gotta come up with a cool name.
but no, back to your answer, Don. Sorry.
All right. So no, it's mine are historical horror, fiction, gothic. So what really happened was I didn't see, I guess, doing straight up history to reach an audience to teach them lessons or teach them history that they otherwise wouldn't have access to. And the thing is, history writing, or I should say reading history itself, unless you're really into history, if you're a history fan, you're not going to pick up somebody's book. And unless you're a certain celebrity, or you're not going to pick up that book unless it's written, quote unquote, written by a certain celebrity, right? Because I hate to break it to you, but Bill O'Reilly wasn't writing any of those fucking books. He wasn't writing any of those books. He was too busy sexually harassing coworkers. Anyway, what I did was I took some research that I was working on. This was for Bastards of the Bayou as well as Magnolia Lane, and I just took some stuff that I was writing that I was planning on using for academic purposes, and then I just realized, holy shit, why don't I just turn this into true crime / light horror? And then the second book, I got so pissed off when I was writing the material for some research I was working on. And it was about freedom suits, as far as like individuals who actually through the court system sued, or on their behalf had individuals sued for their emancipation. And as I was reading through this stuff, I think I'd come across these people who were, while I was working on the paper, I'd come across something like on YouTube or on the news or something, and somebody was having some cotillion, or they were having a wedding or a bachelorette party or something like that at a plantation. I was like, you've got to be shitting me. We're still doing this. We're still doing this. So I decided, all right, cool. This paper is going to be used for my course. And I actually submitted it to a conference last year. It was this year in 2022, and won an award for it. But when I was writing it, I'm like, no, I'm going to take the research I was doing and throw it into a horror story. So it involved all the stuff I was working on for professional reasons and for academic reasons, and put all these people that decided to go on a tour of a plantation into this story. And the people who were respectful to history didn't die. The people who were dicks, they all died. And my favorite review is still from my mom. When she read it, James has heard this before. When she read it, she immediately called me. I don't understand why you had to do all those things to those people in your book. I was like, Mom, they weren't paying attention. That's why they had to die. They were disrespectful to what had happened, all the pain and things. But you didn't have to do it. I was like, Mom, do you want the next book dedicated to you? You know what? I actually do kind of like what you did. That was very smart.
Yeah. That's right. You know where your bread's buttered, lady.
Yeah.
That's right.
Don't you question my methods, madam.
You gave me life, but what else have you done for me?
Plus,
that was 40 years ago.
It's fun seeing people's reactions, especially like shows, conventions, book festivals, and stuff like that. When you tell them, they're like, "Oh my God, I hate when people do those things." Here, let me buy your book. I'm like, here you go.
Nice.
Fantasize about what you would want to have done to those people, and trust me, I probably did it in the book.
There you go. You just tapped into revenge fantasies in a really kind of classy way.
Yeah.
I like that.
It was fun. It was fun.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing that horror does really well, is it talks about problems, and I it's one of its big strengths, I think, is it enables us to talk about things that are, too painful to deal with kind of head on, or just awkward. It's funny, like, you walk into a room and you're like, I'm going to talk about Jesus. And like, I'm a religious guy, but if I hear that, I'm like, are we doing that right now? Like this way, this doesn't seem like the right place for it, but you walk in and you're like, hey, I just saw The Exorcist, which, is about God and the devil at its core. I mean, it really is mono, light and dark stuff. And that's okay, so we can talk about it in terms of a story that, made us scream or made us laugh or whatever. I think comedy and horror, both, they allow us to kind of like sidestep into discomfort and talk about things that are a little tough to just sit down and have a talk about, especially with a stranger, So that's one of the things I love about it. And you can say, you can tell a story that on its face is just this kind of fun slasher, paranormal, whatever. And then, at the end, you're like, and by the way, this is about antebellum practices that we're still, for some reason, glorifying in 2022. And people are like, oh my gosh, crap. And you've had this opportunity to maybe change something.
I love that. I really like the Jesus example you just used, because that is something that I'm always like, you can kind of hit this part where if you say Jesus, then people kind of shut down immediately, because even if you are religious, you kind of like don't want to get into that right now or whatever. But that is really weird. I've never thought about it. How if you followed it with The Exorcist, you can talk about a lot of the same things, just in a very different way. And wow, that blows my mind. I love it. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
That's
Horror's
really
cool like that. Horror, and that's one of the reasons I do like, people have their favorites, and you know, if whatever your favorite is, it's great. But I do think like that's one of the big strengths of horror, because even it can do that, and no other genre really can. As far as talking about metaphysical stuff, even, you know, people go, "Oh, science fiction does all the time." I'm like, science fiction really, what it does is it turns angels into aliens, but it strips them of their divinity at the same time, because there's a bit of mystery in the divine. You know, and as soon as it's an alien, the whole purpose is we're going to take it and dissect it either physically, you know, or we're going to dissect it philosophically or, you know, emotionally. And as soon as you've dissected it, it's no longer got that mystery and that sense of divine purpose. And so you're just doing a science project, which is cool. And like, I'm not an anti-science guy. Science is critical and important, you know, so that's an important area. But, you know, if you want to get into the nitty gritty of, you know, why are we here? Who are we really? Who were we before? Stuff like that kind of goes beyond the boundaries of what we know into that fuzzy beyond. Horror is just a much better vessel for dealing with it, because you can say, hey, we're going to tell a story at a campfire. And it's, you know, if you sit down with your friends, you know, around, you're having game night and you're going to play Fortnite, you're like, hey guys, what do you think about God? You know, and they're like, oh my gosh, can't I just shoot someone in the face and play my game? You know? But if you sit down at the campfire and you're like, so this is a story of evil and of good with a capital E and a capital G, and people are like, I'm in it, you know? And it's just something magical about the process of storytelling that we allow ourselves. Okay, if you're going to preach to me, that's not what I want necessarily. But if you're going to tell a good story, I can hang with that, you know? And one of the things that I get most upset about is when I go to a movie, I think the story, you know, a good movie is like a construction. It's like a building, and the story is the bricks, and the theme and the moral are the mortar that make it last and hold it up. But I really get pissed when I go see a movie and it's the reverse. It's like all mortar with a brick put in here and there. Like, boy, my least favorite movie the whole year was The Incredibles 2, the year that came out, because I felt like it was just, I walked in and it was screaming its messages at me, some of which I disagreed with and some of which I was fine with. But it was just preach. Now, if because it was 80% preaching and 20% story, if it had flipped it, man, that guy could have said all the same stuff and I would have been like, I'll listen to you, whether I agree with it or not, because I'm enjoying the story and that's engaging me on a level that we can be comfortable. So stories are just magic, and the most powerful people in the world, 100% of them, are people who have an understanding of how to tell a good story and how to utilize storytelling techniques to present their message effectively. Every tyrant through history has sold themselves through storytelling. Every Caesar has had a really good author streak in them.
Yeah. And really good audience building too.
Yeah. No, for real. There's a PR department that's working really well. But if you don't start with a good story, and by good story, I mean effective, it's like, it's an awful, we're going to tell them all that the Jews are the reason Germany suffers right now. And they're like, well, we lost World War I and there's reparations issues. Like, that's a sucky story. That's a boring, and it involves civics. So let's just make a horror story and just make it all the Jews' fault. And that's an abhorrent, horrific thing, but it was an effective story, and that's the way that particular group grabbed power, is they created a horror story and they're like, and we will kill the boogeyman, which is an empowering thing for people. And in this case, it was an empowering thing that was incredibly misplaced, obviously, and had a horrific outcome. But you look at everybody who's kind of risen to power and they've been able to couch metaphysical terms in some kind of story. And that's one of the things I do love about horror, is because, again, like, I can sit there and be like, I really want to talk about the nature of the universe, or family, or mental health, or whatever. And if I stick it into a horror story, man, I can bloviate about that for 500 pages. And I just have to make sure I do it in an entertaining way. But people are going to listen to whatever my perspective is.
Wow, I love that.
Well, thank you. I'll end the session now before I say something stupid.
This has been a great episode, and
we'll see you next week on the Necronomicon.
We'll throw you a real softball question. You ready? Why'd you pick Prey?
Oh, you know what? It was nice to not have a Predator movie suck. Like, I saw Predator in the theaters. Like, it was in the drive-in. Which, for the younger audiences, in the olden times, we used to go to a big movie screen that was the size of an average movie screen now. But for us, it was enormous. And it was so big, there was no building large enough to contain it. We couldn't find a pyramid big enough to house this screen. So we would go and drive up in our cars and watch the movie, usually with a box that had almost as good sound quality as a pair of Dixie cups taped together, But I went and saw it with my dad, who was the world expert on Stephen King for 20 years. So I would sit and watch movies with this guy, and he would make these wonderful observations, and he would talk about, the themes underlying things. And we went and saw Predator, and he didn't talk. It was just a fun movie. And my dad stopped going to movies soon thereafter because he became mostly deaf, and it just stopped being fun for him for obvious reasons. So it's just such a good memory going to see Predator with my dad. And then Predator 2 came out, and I remember going to see that with a couple of my friends. Little side story. We all went together. There was a girl I was kind of interested in, and she couldn't get a ticket. They wouldn't give it to her because she looked too young. And I was like, I'm no longer interested in you. And so we went and saw So Shallow. We went and saw Predator 2, and I remember being so pissed off because it was just such a terrible, dumb, gross movie. It just had nothing redeeming about it except for Gary Busey. Watching him be crazy is always kind of fun. So yeah, and it's never had a good return. They're the best they've managed is that was kind of fun and not too terribly offensive from an artistic standpoint. So I saw Prey, and I was like, oh, this was really fun, and I enjoyed it. It had such nice callbacks to the original, even though the way she wears her face paint called back to the Comanche, to Billy in Predator,
right.
The first Predator. So just things like that there, and it had its problems, which I kind of don't want to get into because a lot of them are spoiler related, but I have a big problem with, like, we're going to have a trap that works so long as the main character that we're trying to trap steps into the square inch that we need, involving this huge
we talk tons of spoilers. So.
Okay. Yeah.
We're all about spoilers, so go for it.
My big problems with the movie, honestly, were like, okay, I'm going to invent this axe thing. It's like a throwing. So I've done martial arts, and probably the hardest things to learn are anything attached to a rope. There's just too much, the physics are too wonky. They're so hard to learn. If you're talking about like a meteor hammer or, a dagger at the end of a rope or something like that, they are so hard. And she's like, I'm going to tie my rope to this axe, and I'm going to kill a bunch of rabbits with it because, that's what ropes do. They make your axe more accurate, and they're easy to learn. So I get it's a movie and they have to compress the time, but I was like, just, give me a montage they gave us a montage, but it was like, and it was so clear that she spent 15 minutes working really hard. It was like, I haven't seen that level of hard work and dedication since I saw Rey become a Jedi through no fault of her own. So but whatever, it was fun. And then I liked that she was, gutsy and tough and everything. But I also liked that there was cool guys in the movie, like, I feel like so much now the movie, if there's a woman who's capable and strong, they have to balance it by throwing 100% male characters who just suck, who are just the worst. And I felt like they walked a good line. Like, there was definitely douchey male characters that are just there, they're going to die. From the moment they talk, you're like, you are so annoying and awful. You are here so that when the predator kills you, we feel good about it. And they definitely had that. But also her brother, Tabe, I think his name was, he was like, I remember there's a scene in it where he comes running in on a horse, and I watched that and I was with a friend and I was like, if this had come out in theaters, this dude, Dakota Beavers, he would be on every magazine on Monday.
Yes.
Because I am a pretty grounded heterosexual, and I seriously thought about making some life changes based on that scene. Because he was so great. And it wasn't, Chris Hemsworth rolling in and being like, I'm beautiful because look at this. It was just like, I am going to be badass because A, I've trained for it, and B, that's my sister, you know? And so she was wonderful, and she was strong and tough. And, she had stuff going on behind her eyes. Just the actress, Amber Midthunder, was, holy cow. I hope that girl has a serious career, because I like seeing actors that there's something happening behind the scene. It's not just lines for them. There's some thought in their eyes. And she had that in spades. But you also see, she wants to do things different. Her brother is giving her a chance, not in a disempowering way, not like because I'm the man necessarily, but like he's pushing for change in a kind of subtle way as well in their tribe and saying, let her try, So I thought they had a nice balance of, let's have a female character who's the lead and who's strong and who's tough, but A, also is allowed to screw up, which she did, and B, is allowed to have a character arc, because I feel a lot of the female character arcs are, I'm going to start here strong, tough, and resilient, and at the end of the movie, I will also be those things. She actually had a progression, which was nice to see. And, just doing basic mistakes like, I got my bow wet and now it's not going to work at the right time, which my brother was the one who told me not to do that. And I gave him crap about it. So, it had a fun balance where she's allowed to learn and grow. She never at any point seemed like a shrinking violet. She was not a wallflower. She was going to make her own way. But there was also, I thought it showed there was value in the women of the tribe who were doing their thing as well. Everyone's off dying with the predator. And it shows Mom, she had the coolest moment of the whole movie, I thought, was her kids are gone. The whole hunting party's wiped out and it hasn't come back. So she's got to be assuming the worst. And what's she out doing? She's cleaning a buffalo hide. She is doing chores, and I was like, that for me was the strongest moment in the whole movie. This woman being like, I've lost my entire genetic line has been cut off. Well, I guess I better go make the bed,
Then it's that way of dealing with grief, and we don't know how we deal with grief until we're faced with that situation or the possibility of that situation. So it's kind of like, shit, life not necessarily life goes on, but oh my God, my the lineage is done now.
Yeah. So I thought there was so much good about the movie. They handled a lot of things that are tough in a good way. There was it's almost, I wonder if in 30 years, we have tropes like don't have sex in the woods. And I almost wonder if, in 20 years, they're going to do some meta trope. They're like, don't be a white man in a horror movie, but in this one, it made sense. The bad guys were these French trappers, and they were awful. But even then, it was a little more nuanced. I thought it wasn't just like, we're all rapists and we're all here to murder you. Like there was one guy who was kind of he was the communicator and the translator, and he provided a bit of a bridge, and he was still pretty awful, but ultimately he had some honor too. He shows up and he's like, help me. He puts his gun down and he's like, I'll show you how to use the gun. And this is the moment where I think in a lesser script, it would have had him then try and assault her. And instead, he showed her how to use the gun. And the way his story ended was much better than going down and now we're all going to be the same rapey guy,
Right.
And it fed into the story. And even what happens with him allows her to learn without him just having to be a one-dimensional, awful character. And he was a good actor too. Like you could see, again, there was a lot going on behind his eyes. He's like, look, I'm the third kid. I was not going to make any money. This is where I had to go with my life. I try and be less rapey than the others. That's good for me, And I thought he did a great job. So, and the cinematography was so good. So beautiful.
You know, that
Absolutely.
first shot that you get right before the title screen, before you're made aware that you're watching Prey.
Yeah.
That shot of Naru and Sari is outstanding because it reminded me of an image that was used in a couple of classes I took, and then classes that I used as well, which was a group of indigenous people on the Atlantic coast looking off in the distance and seeing ships. And the assignment that I gave my students was give me their perspective. What are they seeing? Because that shot of the, what she thought was a Thunderbird, but that shot of the alien ship or the Predator ship, flying, and then her looking up, all I was thinking was, what are the perspectives that's going on? And of course, when she returns back to the village, she's like, I saw a sign, I saw a Thunderbird. It's my time. It's my time. Meanwhile, you have the exact opposite, which is, or excuse me, you have the other perspective, that of the predator people, predator beings, whatever. Hey, new hunting grounds. Here's an unexplored area that we can go to and find some stuff. Because I'm sure that was the predator's Kukatumwai experience that he had to be on. So there are a lot of parallels as far as the identities and things that have to be done, and the whole idea of like, oh, we're hunting a bear, and like I'm assuming, but the predator itself, he ends up killing the bear in front of her and covering himself in the blood, and James made fun of me. He was like, I'm putting in my notes, Don likes when the animals get killed. in and of itself, that should have been, well, no, that shot with her right before the title screen, that could have been the preview right there, and you're like, oh shit, what is it? Where's this going? Because there's so much mystery as far as what she's to expect from this Thunderbird, or what she's expecting out of life, and the mystery involved as far as any predator that steps down on this earth, as far as what they're going to see. Because all the stuff is new for that predator, especially when he comes up on the hunting ground, or I should say the killing ground, when it's very clear that the French trappers have just massacred all these buffalo just for their skin, excuse me, for their fur and their hides,
their fur,
as opposed to using anything else. But that wasn't the way the business was set up. It was go get us some really cool furs, sell them, send them back home, make a shitload of money, and rise up within the societal ranks. Yeah.
I thought there was a lot of good stuff about it. And that was just, honestly, how sad is that? I was just thrilled that it didn't suck. Yeah.
I'm of the same opinion, because I told James before, actually more than just today when we were texting back and forth, but I like Predator 2 in the sense of it's just stupid. It's a dumb action movie. Predator 1 I love because it's a classic 80s action movie with all the one-liners and the stupid macho, stuff that's out there. I ain't got time to bleed. That type of stuff, right? And I was telling him before we start, I said, this is now my favorite Predator movie, because I didn't bother with Alien versus Predator because you lost me with the way the approach was. And even the one with Keegan-Michael Key, when I saw the premise, I'm like, this is not what I want. And, best wishes to anybody who likes the movie. I mean, because again, I don't view movies as good or bad. It's you like it or you don't. It's your thing or it's not your thing. You can say that something was poorly executed or wasn't well shot or anything like that, but art is based off of, subjectivity. But when that movie came out, I'm like, I'm not in it. I love the Predator lore. I love all that stuff, but I'm not interested in this movie of a bunch of ragtag special ops guys and some government program where we're now, basically playing Jurassic Park with predators.
Totally. Well, and that one was hard for me too, because Shane Black, I like Shane Black a lot. I mean, he was one of the people I first read when I was like, I'm going to be a screenwriter, and Lethal Weapon. Oh, so good. And he has such a unique voice in the screenplays. I remember one of the screenplays that wasn't very good he wrote, but he would write stuff like, and now there's a sex scene, which I won't describe because first of all, the director and the stunt coordinator will come up with way better stuff. And second of all, my mom reads these. So moving on. And I'm like, that's pretty baller. Like, that's pretty awesome, you know? So I heard he got announced and he's done some interesting stuff. Shane Black has, like, obviously the big things, Lethal Weapon, Long Kiss Goodnight, stuff like that. But also, I mean, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, which was a really marvelous kind of low key movie that showcased Robert Downey Jr. and Val Kilmer in a light that we hadn't really seen and was really delightful. So I was excited to see what would happen, but I was also worried because I feel like whenever he goes big, even with Iron Man 3, it feels like he's still writing a couple decades ago in a certain way. And I just didn't want that. So I liked that, oddly enough, they had to go back 400 years in time to get kind of a modern feeling Predator, you know? But it really did, you know, and it was able to be. I liked one of the necessary artifacts of it is because it's out in nature, it strips away a lot of the technological focus. I mean, obviously, we are still in a science fiction movie, but we're talking bows and arrows here. So there's not going to be a massive info dump, you know, and we're going to, which allows just spatially, it allows time for things like character development, which is fantastic, you know? So I thought that was fun. And I did like a lot how they, just little things too, like the fact that even the Predator, the actual form of the Predator was a lot leaner. It was a lot closer to what you would have seen, you know, like a Native American or an Aboriginal person who was not full of food. You know, they were lean and hungry and they were out looking for their day to day. And so the Predator kind of mirrored that, I thought, in a nice way, even. There's just a lot of attention to detail. And I like how they old it up. You know, they made his technology, the Predator's technology, recognizable, but you're also like, oh, this is still in beta testing. You know, the one that we actually see in Predator.
Right.
Like this is, you know, Weapon 2.0, not the 18th iteration of it. And it was really, really fun. And also I thought that the director had a good sense of when not to show stuff. You know, sometimes I get that sometimes it's fun to see, you know, somebody's head explode or whatever. But sometimes it's just more effective to have it happening in the background. There's a wonderful scene where you see these two French guys who are in position to try and ambush the Predator, and behind them, you just see kind of blurry, out of focus pieces falling, you know, and so much better that way than if it had been like a, you know, a long shot, you know, or a medium wide shot with the aperture tight so that we can get a really long depth of field and see everything in high focus and actually see their viscera tumbling out, you know, like just seeing stuff falling. You're like, whoa, this is not going to go these guys' way at all. And so there's just a lot of artistry to it, and it's rare. I mean, people say, I do hear, and I'm sure you guys have heard, like, why don't they make more good movies, you know? And having been on the movie side of it, I'm like, you see 1,000 names on the credits, or 10,000 if it's a Marvel movie, and every single one of those people has the absolute control to script the movie. I think it's a miracle we get any good movies.
Yes.
And so seeing this one happen, there was a lot of things that could have gone dreadfully wrong. And the worst I can say about the movie personally from my response was, yeah, I didn't like the fact that our whole trap hinged on getting him into a single position and then having him stand there going, what's going on, with his own technology?
Right.
You know, because he's like, what's this noise happening that I've never heard before, except for the 30 times 5 minutes ago? Maybe I should look for the 3 dots, you know? But that's the worst I can say about it, is it was kind of a lazy end kill. I would have, you know, anytime I look at something and go, I could have thought of something better given all the parts they had already put in play in about 10 minutes. I'm like, that's a bummer. But that's
the part that I disliked the most. Yeah.
Yeah. But even that's okay for me, because really that's just tying up loose ends, because her climax is already over at that point. Her story is she's a warrior, and it's almost like she could even die and have the same emotional response, because her arc is completed, you know, and her going back and, you know, tossing the Predator's head at people's feet and being the war chief, that's all nice and good. but I didn't even care at that point. I think the moment where there's a really nice shot of her jumping over the predator using her magic axe throwing technique. And that's like her big moment, and whether it works out or not, she won. So I could forgive the predator for some reason not understanding what's going on, as his own weapon is clearly aimed at him.
I have such an issue with her using his weapons. I'm very used to the whole thing in sci-fi now where people today would know what a laser is and how to use
my
it.
Gosh,
and
right.
I fucking hate that she doesn't even know what any of this is.
Right.
Like, why would she know that she could remote control something? That bothers me so much.
Well,
I'm like,
she had to have the gun explained to her.
Yeah, and then she can do that. Like, she knows that the mask will control this. Like, what? No, I hate this. I hate this ending so much.
It does make sense if you think like guns, their basic problem is they're not Apple technology. So obviously the Predator is just a one button operating system. It's idiot proof. So like we didn't see the scene where she tried to figure out which app made the 3 dots appear, because that's the only thing that really has to be figured out.
But even if she had seen him use it somehow, that would do more for me. But I'm just like, I agree. She doesn't even know what it is. How would she know how to use it?
Here's something I wish had been included, and this would have probably might have cleared it up for you, James. Might have cleared it up for both of you. But if she had put the helmet on and looked through it, and if there had been 3 dots, and she's like, "Oh, that's that's what I saw on so and so," and she figured out like, "Oh, this is like the rifles that the white men are using or whatever." And then decides, puts it down in between those trees, and then looks in a direction and is like, "Oh, I need to trap him here," and then you start seeing like she's setting up the trap, kind of like Arnold set up the trap. Where it's kind of like, "I'm gonna get you to come here. Don't worry, James. I'm not gonna do the impression. I'm gonna get you to come here. I'm gonna get you to come to this area, and then I'm gonna end you." But what would have been cool is if there had been a moment like in Predator. Not that you always have to have a connection, but I think this would have been something that would have worked, where the Predator realizing that it's being hunted and is reluctant to go where she is. And then she has to improvise, right? Because earlier in the film, there's that discussion with Tabi, Pui, and actually, no, Pui's out. With the other young men, where Tabi definitely says, "Hey, this is a good place for us to be. We're in the lion's den. The lion is going to think it's hunting us, but we're hunting it." And it would have been interesting to kind of see that connection as well. I mean, there is that connection because the Predator thinks that it's hunting Naru when Naru is setting all this stuff up to trap him, or at least to fight and hopefully kill him. But no, like the other thing, and I know I'm going to forget this, so I got to mention it right now because James would let me forget. I got to say, not just with Naru's performance, but the animal trainers for this movie. Training Suri. One, Suri is a rescue dog that they got from I think it was the Fulton County Animal Control or wherever it was. And they specifically had this dog because it would have fit it within the timeline. And I because as I was looking, I was like, okay, well, that's something you don't always think to look for as far as like what dogs were actually around at this period, what breeds. And the dog is an American dingo. And I forgot the study I was looking at, but basically the article was stating that these dogs existed in America at this time. And they're affectionately known as, I think, Carolina hounds or something. I can't remember the name, but I just remembered American dingo, Carolina dogs. They were American dingoes. They existed at a time. It would be the same thing as if, I know I'm going to throw it out there, if there happened to be a predator during the Aztec Empire, you're gonna have to get cholos. You're gonna have to get those. You're gonna have to get those dogs. More than likely, it's not going to be a Chihuahua, which would be a ridiculous dog to include, because cholos are these. They look like Dobermans, and they're really sweet dogs, but they're very protective.
Mm-hmm.
So it would have been interesting. I mean, again, if you're looking at different time periods, different geographic regions, it'd be interesting. But I think that was a cool touch. The other thing was the way in which indigenous people are represented in this movie. You earlier brought up a couple of things as far as like, the family situation, the idea of the family dynamics, gender dynamics, and you get this understanding that Naru is not on board with the gender dynamics, and she wants to prove herself.
Mm-hmm.
But what I really like about this movie is there's never this direct confrontation, except for a couple of the douchebag hunters, where it's like, oh, you're a woman. Oh, it's good that you're here. Well, nobody's injured, so you can go home. You don't need to be. We're hunting. We're doing this. And her brother is basically like, she's really good at this, and this. We need her.
Yeah.
And not, oh, she could do anything a man can do. Why would you guys say something like this about my sister? Which would have gone against it, but it's still interesting to treat it respectfully and demonstrate that she is breaking some sort of tradition or traditional viewpoint. You look at the way that indigenous folks have been represented within American cinema. I mean, for the longest time, you didn't have indigenous people on that side of the camera. I mean, they definitely were behind the camera, but you didn't have, with the camera facing them, because you typically had non-indigenous people playing indigenous people as a generalization, as a stereotype, as a caricature. And within the last, I would probably say 20 years, I'm sorry, we did have Lone Ranger. I would say within the last 10 years, you've seen more representation. You have shows like Reservation Dogs. You had Hell or High Water. You've got a good number of films in which there is indigenous representation that is respectful, and it's not in the same vein as where we're going to pretend to make a movie that's respectful of your history, but we're going to completely screw it up by changing the lore, changing the story, changing the look, and completely giving you a sanitized garbage version of this, otherwise known as Pocahontas. And then make the argument of, we have Native Americans that are on the production. We have Native Americans that are in the movie. Voice actors are completely different when you're talking about who you're going to have. And plus, this is nothing against Disney. This is just with the production team that made this decision. One of the very, very prominent Native American activists was included in this film, Russell Means. Like, this guy was at the Second Battle of Wounded Knee. He was like, this guy walked the walk and talked the talk. Mm-hmm. And in order to ensure that this film was going to be made, they made concessions with him to be in the movie, because they figured it's better to have him on the inside of the movie where he can give us his viewpoint, rather than he's not included in the movie and we got a major person protesting and organizing protests against this movie. And it's phenomenal that the change that we've seen in 30 years, let alone 100 plus years, but just within 30, 20, 10, 15 years, that you're now getting a movie like this. And now, because of this movie, Reservation Dogs, and other representation that's out there, you're seeing a huge call for indigenous representation, or more indigenous representation. So much so that it's gotten competitive on social media, especially Native Talk on TikTok, where people who are part of the Comanche Nation have basically turned it into, we got a movie before any of you other guys got a movie. So we got a badass movie where we killed a predator. Like, what the hell are you guys doing? And so it's created this need, or at least this idea that there needs to be more of, quote unquote, more of us that's represented, so we don't get erased anymore.
And I like that. I like a lot of that too. I think they were respectful, and that's so important. And I think, one of the things that's sad about today's world, I feel like there's an expectation that you were born fully formed from the womb with all the right attitudes and ideals, whatever they are. and that's just not human. Like I would expect. I'm always kind of saddened when somebody's career is ended because a 20-year-old tweet surfaced. I'm like, I don't know. I would hope they're if they're still saying that crap today, that's
Right.
terrible. But if they're not anymore, that to me shows that's someone you do want in charge of the job because they're growing and they're willing to learn, and that's,
Yep.
I'm glad they repented of their badness. That's a good person in my book, is someone who screwed up but doesn't anymore. And so that's another thing I did like about this is I never got an angry vibe off of it. Like there's some movies that are out there like pushing for representation, which is a good thing, and maybe this is just me living in like rose-colored glasses world, but I think most people are fundamentally at heart good. I think we learn how to be bad as we're injured over the years,
Right.
and so I like seeing movies that kind of take that approach. Like, look, let's have this group that's maybe not been represented well or hasn't been properly represented or in their best light or whatever. Let's do an awesome job with them. But it doesn't, I feel like sometimes, it's this group climbing up, and the way we want to do that is by putting other people under us to stand on and crush into dirt, and I like more people that are like, hey, I'm climbing this mountain too. Isn't that awesome? So I felt like even with the gender dynamic stuff, there was no point where she stood up and she's like, looked at all the women and was like, you're all stupid for being moms.
Right.
The one thing she said was, I want to do this because they tell me I can't. And that makes it such a richer, more full experience than just like, I am the Comanche Susan B. Anthony. That's what I'm really here for. She was just like, I want to do all of this stuff, not because I think women should be warriors. She never once says that. She just says, because you said I couldn't. And that's not okay. And I also think that's a better message, by the way. It's just like, rather than I am this group and I will succeed because I'm this group, but how about just because I'm human and humans are awesome and capable. And you said I'm not capable, but I am human, and those two things don't go together. So I'm going to go kill a predator now. And, that's just, it makes it such less a bitter pill to swallow. I think social change and social improvement and I was talking to my wife, I said, I have friends who are like, I'm a social justice warrior and I'm proud of that. And I'm not knocking that in the least, but I said, I think I'd rather be a social justice builder than a social justice warrior. Because warriors are out there fighting and not just fighting in a struggle sense, but to be a warrior, you're killing something, you're hurting something else. And I'd rather be like, I'm a social justice bridge builder, or I'm a social justice, engineer, something that it's rather than being couched in terms of, I'm going to fight for this good thing by hurting other things. How if I'm just going to fight for this good thing by building awesome stuff that enables and assists that good thing? And I feel like this movie did that. There was no sense of hatred towards anybody else. There was just an awesome, cool group of really interesting people who are like, we are this group of humans from this place and time, and now we're going to shine for you. And I think that was just really, really just kind of heartwarming to see. And I know it's funny to say, Prey, the heartwarming Predators movie, but it was, from that perspective.
I agree completely. That's great.
So what I found really interesting there's a lot of interesting stuff about this film. So what stood out to me was this idea of the juxtaposition of the predator pursuing the indigenous people. But also you have this idea that he's not specifically targeting them for being indigenous people, whereas the Europeans that you're looking at through this time period, we're talking about the 18th century, early 18th century, they were specifically targeting indigenous folk. So when you talk about the violence that they received, it was not just about removing them off of their land or even removing them as a threat. It was about erasing them. Whereas I don't want to give the predator too much credit, but when you look at the predator and you think about he's doing this or it's doing this because it's an aspect of kind of the same thing, the katabui that the Comanche are practicing. it's not specifically targeting them because of who they are. It's specifically targeting them, or just target them in general, because of how they're interacting with other beings. So the predator is only seeking out other things that are seeking out prey. So by going after them, he's just doing it no differently than he was doing with the bear, behaving no differently than he did with the snake or the coyote. Whereas, as we see with the French trappers, they're just doing it because they can. And because this idea of, racial superiority or cultural superiority that they feel that they have. And that kind of lends itself to the end of the film, where Naru comes back and she says, we're not safe here. And a lot of people are going to look at it as, you're not safe here because of the predator or potential other predators that might be out there. But it's also about the idea that the Europeans that have been in that area are encroaching even more, because it's clear there's not been an interaction between them. When she smells the gunpowder, when she actually comes into contact with them, and that one guy's like, oh, I speak many languages. I speak your language as well. Now, not saying other Comanches hadn't, but she hadn't. And Tabe probably hadn't. Because it doesn't seem, at least with the relationship that you have, it doesn't seem as though they're on any familiar standing with them. And at least for the French trappers that are there, they're encroaching on that territory. They're killing the buffalo, the bison, and further encroaching closer to where the Comanche are. So when she comes back and has this line of like, we need to move, we need to leave this area, it's not safe for us anymore. It's not just about the threat of some extraterrestrial being. It's about the Europeans that are coming and are going to eradicate them. So we need to go find some place that's safe for us, because we're not going to be able to stop what's coming. And it lends itself to that same line that's given at the end of The Last of the Mohicans, where the father is stating, the time of my people is over. The time of the people of my white son and his woman is coming. Like, they will forget people like me. We will be gone and will disappear. And just pointing out, I can tell the danger that's coming. We need to delay it as much as possible. And the only way that we can delay it is we need to move. What'd you think?
I mean, I hadn't like thought of it as deeply as that, and I'm kind of blown away by what you just said. So honestly, I'm a little thrown off. I don't know. Like, I have this weird thing where I watched the film and I wasn't a big fan. I was kind of bored, and in the days that I've had to think about it since, it's really kind of hit me harder. And I kind of want to go back and rewatch it now, because I think maybe I just wasn't in the right mood when I watched it. But
it's also, you don't like action movies.
I don't like action movies, but this one does hit differently, and everything you just said kind of sums that up and why. But I also feel like there's so many things that like with Native culture that I really dig and really like, that just even like how you were talking about how they're just doing, I don't know how to say it, but the hunting.
Oh, the katabui.
Thank you. Like, they're just going about their day, and yet that's a threat to the predator, and I don't know, man, the whole, like, it really kind of changes how I was thinking about it. So I'm not answering your question at all, because I don't even think I can, but it's really, I'm kind of blown away by what you just said. And now I really want to go back and watch it again.
Well, that's why I started the show by saying fuck John Wayne. And it's not just about him. It's partially about him, but it's also, you've got the erasure and the genocide. I mean, there's no other way to say it, but you've got the erasure and the genocide of millions of indigenous people throughout the continents, as far as North, Central, and South, or just the American continent, depending on your perspective, you see it all as one. But there's the actual erasure of them as far as killing them off, taking their land, or just killing them off by taking things that they would be reliant on, not actually actively, intentionally killing them through the use of violence, but through the use of the environment, right? But there's also the idea of killing them off as far as removing their culture, because once you started pushing indigenous folks out of the southeast and into what is now the southwest, and putting them on reservations, restricting their movement, changing their way of life, and then ultimately taking their kids in the 19th and 20th century, taking their children. And again, this is all throughout the continent, because this past year there are a lot of remains of indigenous children that were found in Canada on former sites of these schools. You would take these children away from their parents to completely disassociate them from their culture, and it led to a cultural genocide. With from talking to indigenous folks when I was living in Arizona, one of the things that they were happy they could do now was teach their kids the language, teach their kids religious practices, celebrate their culture openly, whereas their parents' generation, they could not do those things. In fact, I think it was up until the 60s, it was illegal for you to leave some of the reservations. And when it came to leaving the reservations, it was basically you're pushed off. It was, get out there, because now we can actually eliminate you even faster, because instead of you consolidating your culture, now because you're going to be looking for jobs in factories or in trucking or in construction or anything like that, we don't have to worry about you as far as maintaining your identity, maintaining your culture. And it's still an issue that indigenous peoples are dealing with today, where one of the most disproportionately groups that goes missing or murdered is indigenous women. And someone did a study recently, and they showed direct correlation between the petrochemical companies that are doing things like fracking, shale oil drilling, stuff like that. Like those communities where you see these guys coming in to go and work in the oil fields, the women, Native women, are disappearing in those areas when the work moves. So wherever you see there's an oil field that people are working on, whether it's, like I said, fracking, gas, shale, whatever it is, you see the jobs moving, and you see indigenous women disappearing or being murdered.
Wow.
But again, it's one of those things, they've been so erased. As much as I dislike Chris Rock, personally dislike Chris Rock, he has some good observations. And in one of his stand-up, I can't remember, it was Bigger and Blacker or one of the earlier ones that he did, where he said, let me tell you how bad, and I think he used the term Indians instead of indigenous or Native American. But he said, let me tell you how bad the Indians have it. When's the last time you saw two?
Jesus.
And it, of course, I grew up on the East Coast and in the South. So immediately I'm thinking like, fuck, I can't think of the last time I saw two together. And he made a joke and he said, you have seen more polar bears riding tricycles than you've seen Native American people. Now,
wow,
it's different if you're in the West or in the Southwest. You're going to see more indigenous folks. But he had a great point, because there's been so much erasure. You don't fucking see anybody of these backgrounds. And if you do see them, and it's in a very limited capacity, or it's specifically addressing indigenous culture. So you might have a hoop dancers, or you might have a powwow that's being done. In fact, when I used to go to the Mercury games, they had the WNBA All-Star game was held in Phoenix one year. And one of the most prominent players that year was Shoni Schimmel. Like, she was a standout in college. She won Rookie of the Year. She won the All-Star MVP that year. And it was, no one gave a damn about anybody else in the building, because so many indigenous folks had come to see her play that entire arena was cheering for Shoni Schimmel as opposed to any other player that was there. Even the hometown team players did not give a damn. When Shoni Schimmel was on the court, that's all anyone was cheering for, because there were so many indigenous groups that specifically made the trip to come and see her play, because of how much it meant to have someone of their background or of their people, of their culture, actually there.
That's really cool. I think you kind of hit what I liked about this movie most, though. So there was another movie that I was highly hyped for. I believed it was going to be one of the greatest movies I'd ever seen, and it was Antlers.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Leonard Part 6.
No. And Antlers, in my opinion, because I'm not going to speak for Native people, but it felt really insulting to Native culture to me. And this movie respects the shit out of Native culture. And like listening to you talk about like how people are erased and how the history is erased and all of that, and then watching something where people went so deep to make sure that the sets were right and that the language was right. And I can complain all day about using a couple Comanche words and then doing the rest in English, because I would prefer all Comanche in this situation. And I guess that cut is out there. I haven't seen it.
I was going to say there is a Comanche version.
Yeah, so I didn't know that. I would have probably watched that, and I might have actually liked it more because it was kind of distracting for me. But aside from that personal complaint, because I don't think that's disrespectful in any way, but this movie worked really hard to make sure everything was right. Like you talked about the American dingo before and making sure the dog would have been there in that time. And just, it's so respectful. And then I look at Antlers where, number one, it's focused on, I don't have a better word, so a legend that Natives don't want to talk about. And then the portrayal of, what's his name? Graham Greene? Is that his name?
I think, yes. Actor?
Like, just everything about it bothered me so much. And I do not like Antlers. And anyone who likes Antlers, good for you. I personally don't, because it did feel so disrespectful. And that's one thing I just really wanted to say, is that I loved how much care and respect went into making this film.
Yeah, and it's important. I mean, and the thing that you and I talked about before, here in panels, in conversation, is that representation matters. Representation is important, and it's more than having a token character here or there, right? It's about, you have that person that's there, and not just that they're on screen, but they are seen in their entirety. So you don't have to make the entire story about. I know there are a lot of complaints with films with African American narratives of like, oh, it's about suffering. Oh, this has to be about the civil rights movement or slavery, right? That takes up a bulk of the historical timeline, so it makes sense as to why you have those things. But when you have a Black character, or a Latino character, or an Afro-Latino character, or an Asian character, or whoever, just as what we saw with Everything Everywhere All at Once, you got to see that family, but they were not treated as, oh, here's our token Asian neighbors. Here's the token Asian family that we're throwing in, where their identity is not the story, but you can't have the story without including aspects of their identity. Because once you do that, you do erase them and you tokenize them at that point. It becomes a thing of, basically the way tokenization would work is, I can literally throw any person into this role and it will all be done the same way.
Mm-hmm.
It will always be done the same way. As opposed to, I'm going to create a character or include someone of this background and get some input from them, or input from someone who knows enough about the culture to where it can be displayed respectfully, and it's not played off as a joke, or we're not, making light of their culture or completely bastardizing their experience. But what I was saying, as far as like the idea of the timeline and the way stories can be told, not every indigenous story should be, Trail of Tears or the Battle of Wounded Knee or anything like that. You can have stories that are going to give you a good understanding of that in the film, but you also need to have stories that are going to include everyday folks who happen to be indigenous. You're going to have everyday folks that happen to be Asian, like fresh off the boat. They talk about the immigrant story, but it's not a thing of, they don't diminish their Asian identity. They don't minimize it. They don't make fun. I mean, you make fun of things that are part of your culture to people that will understand what's funny about that, right? And I think that's important to understand as you have those cultural things that come into play. Kind of the same thing as what we were talking about with Naru's mother, and even the way that Naru interacts with Tabe, where Tabe is willing to stand up for her, but he understands there are some cultural patterns, not necessarily cultural beliefs, but cultural patterns that they've all adhered to. But he knows that she's good at stuff, but he just doesn't know how to, I guess, express it in a way that's, one, going to be palatable for an audience and believable, and then two, respectful for the culture. So you just kind of leave it as ambiguous, like, I'm here for my sister, I want to protect her. So you have kind of this universal characteristic that's thrown in. But I just love the way that there's never, from my perspective, there's never a moment that's demeaning towards the culture, to where it's kind of like, hey, look, if you haven't figured it out, these are quote unquote Indians. Hey, we're trying to make a movie that includes, because it doesn't feel hollow or shallow. It feels authentic. And I was saying Indian specifically because that was the way that people would when they're trying to tokenize it.
Oh, yeah.
That's what they would say.
Absolutely.
Even beyond this, right? So we're talking about erasure. You also have to factor in the erasure of culture then leads to mocking, caricatures, and further violence. So, you can have imagery violence, like, that for the Cleveland Guardians with their former name and the former logo that they used when they had the previous name before the Guardians, or the Washington the Commanders now, but the Washington Commanders before they changed their name officially. I mean, they were the Washington football team, but the previous name was a racial slur. And the image, the logo itself, people can argue is respectful. It was this, but even then, you're using a human being, not a job, not a vocation like a cowboy or a stealer or anything like that. That is can be disconnected from an individual race. You're using someone of a specific race as your logo, and it opens it up to all types of mocking, all types of caricatures, all types of ridiculousness, to where you have people chanting and pretending to, swing tomahawks in the crowd, or putting on quote unquote war paint and feathers because, they're being respectful to the native population.
All right, I guess that brings us to the part where we do movie recs, and Michael Brent gets to go first because he's the guest.
Why?
Because that's how it works, damn it. All right.
Go ahead.
Oh my gosh, I wasn't prepared. Well, obviously watch the first one. It is an 80s movie, but I watched it recently and it really holds up. I mean, like, there's the one-liners and those are never going to hold up, but the story itself is great. And it did such a good job alerting you early on. This is a science fiction movie. Even people forget it. They're like, it was such a switch in the middle. All of a sudden it's a sci-fi horror, but the very first shot is a spaceship, so they did such a good job layering stuff in so that when it changes, quote unquote changes, you're prepared for it. It was just a really well done script, and everything about it, is about as good as you can get, especially given the technological limitations. I mean, it still looked good,
Oh yeah.
The technology still works. They like so many good monsters, it was good because of accidents. The original Predator design was like, if Gumby had sex with a lobster, that's what they would have. And so they couldn't go with that, and they ended up with this super awesome thing. So, if you like Prey and you haven't seen the first one, definitely watch that. I would also say Predators, which is one where these 5 killers wake up parachuting onto this alien planet, and the whole thing is like this is basically a practice reserve. And I thought that was really fun. It was stunningly different, but not in a Halloween Ends sort of way. It was like, okay, we're going to take a little side trip, but it was totally coherent with everything else that had happened. There was no point where I was like, are we in the right theater? Like we were talking about earlier. So I really enjoyed that.
I love how you brought that full circle.
Yeah, right. We tie up those loose ends as writers, right? But those are definitely the two that I would say get out and watch. And I also like, it's totally different, but Jordan Peele's Nope, which I would argue strongly is his best movie. Now, I'm not saying it's his most important movie or the movie that's going to change things the most, but I think from a storytelling aspect and from just an artistic aspect, I think he did amazing things. And again, it was like talking about a lot of things we were talking about here. Like there's this group that's underrepresented, misrepresented, malrepresented, that's been trodden on, distorted, destroyed. And they get to shine. Like it is a movie where this group of people, his movies are a lot of race relations and stuff like that. And it's this man and his sister who are the main characters, and they are the heroes of the story. And there's no question about that. And most of the main characters, almost all of them, are from, groups that have historically been poorly represented, and they get to shine. But there's at no point, like there's a white guy who shows up because he's got this expertise they need. And they're not like, but you're going to sit in the back of the bus because that's what you made us do.
Right.
They're like, okay, teach us what we need to know to do the thing we brought you for, So there was no sense of hatred or animus. It was just, hey, look, we're all going to kick ass together. And I love movies like that. Again, and that's maybe naive of me. And I know that struggles are real and fights do have to be fought sometimes. But I think most of the time when we fight, it's just because we want a shortcut, and getting out there and, getting our hands dirty with our neighbor is going to be a much more effective tool. And I think that it kind of embodied that in so many wonderful ways.
All right. And then my double feature is Bacurau, because once again, very respectful to culture and just a fantastic movie all around. So I think Bacurau would go really interestingly with Prey. What do you think about that?
I'm still upset that you took that. But
I'm sure you have.
I don't have
38 other recommendations.
132. So obviously, if I were to do a double feature, it would be Predator, the original.
What?
I know.
Such a swerve.
Crazy. Aliens. Because I love the idea of not reducing horror films or even action films or sci-fi to the present day or to the future, cowboys and aliens. Beast, Prometheus, Slither, The Thing, which I seem to be referencing all the time now. I Am Legend, War of the Worlds, Army of the Dead, which you hate, Species.
I don't hate it. It's just not something I love.
Look, it's a fun, dumb horror comedy action movie. I love it. It's so goofy and dumb and fun.
You put Michael Brent to sleep with all your suggestions. Let's turn it back to you, Michael Brent. Where can people find your books? Where can they follow you on social media and all that good stuff?
You can just Google my first name, Michael Brent. I'm the only one in the world. So just Google that and you'll get my Facebook and my Amazon and stuff like that. My website is writteninsomnia.com. Written Insomnia, stories that keep you up all night. And, if you hop on there, you can get a free book. And it's a good time to do it because it is the first book in my most popular series. And the fourth book is coming out in just a couple of weeks. So that'll be called Stranger Sins. And that's going to be really fun. So definitely grab the first one and start coming along for that ride.
Well, fantastic. Well, thank you for coming on, man. And as always, we appreciate having you and we hope you come back again.
And as always, I appreciate being here, enjoy it, and I will come back again.
You say that now.
All right. I guess that wraps it up for another week. As always, I'm James Sabata.
And I am smarter than a beaver still.
And we'll see you next week here at thenecronoma.com.